Hey there, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'm looking at Michael Deforge's new book. Just came out, just got it in the mail. It's out from Drawn and Quarterly, and it's called Birds of Maine. Really excited about this. I'm always excited about a new Michael Deforge work. I think he's one of the top, innovative cartoonists we have that probably defines what cartooning was for a whole generation of people that he influenced. Super prolific, just always something different, very consistent kind of feel to the work, even though stylistically all over the place. And it looks like surreal type of things that shouldn't make sense, but he's always got a very potent message at the heart of what he does. And I just couldn't be a bigger fan of what he does. So I'm always looking forward to new stuff. This was a piece that came out like almost every day on Instagram. Like it was its own Birds of Maine profile on Instagram. So I've been reading the story there for quite a long time. So I've read most of this before, but only one day at a time. And that was my impression of the book, was that it was like a daily gag strip, and that's how I consumed it. And I was almost tempted to reconsume it that way, but I read it straight through and was actually surprised at the cohesion of it in terms of a narrative, things that I hadn't picked up when it was being released day to day, things that he was obviously, I don't know about baking in, because it has the feeling that he improvised it all and then just expanded on the improvisation. But characters were more important to me on this read through. When I heard that this was being released in a collected volume, I quit reading the strips on Instagram. So I've read most of it prior to sitting down with this, but the ending, I didn't know where it went. So I was excited to blow through it and see it all as one whole, and it really held together as a whole in a really interesting way. It sadly feels a bit unfinished to me. I feel like Michael Deforge could have kept going with this, but also it has that just kind of flux of life where things are happening and then things aren't happening, and so it's just like you get a peek of the life of these birds on the moon. And even though something interesting is happening towards the end, you never get that. You never get that resolution, which I think is interesting. And Deforge is always playing with, kind of subverting expectations, I think. So for people who haven't read it, I mean, it's all still free, available on Instagram if you can't afford the book. If you can afford the book, it's worth picking up. It's Drawn and Quarterly, amazing production. But what it is it's and again, I think this is largely improvised. It feels like the characters and the places coming together as he makes the story. It's birds have left the earth and they've set up a kind of utopian socialist society where they've got a universal worm and they're all fed and taken care of. They still have jobs, they keep busy and stuff, but they're living on the moon, and they have a internet that's, well, they have a lot of different kind of internets, but their main internet is the fungus internet. There's a really kind of a main character, which is this little bird here, Jenny. That's something that I was less cognizant of reading it one at a time. I didn't latch onto the characters so much. Like Jenny and her parents and then her band are kind of the main characters. Living in this society and kind of going through things. Jenny, everyone wants to be a librarian, an archaeologist, or someone who manages the internet, and Jenny wants to design clothes, which the birds all, of course, think is very weird. And they communicate with people back on Earth, as pen pals, and I don't know. It's the typical Michael Deforge, totally wild, imaginative shit, but it comes together still and always has impact. It's not just the kind of psychedelic ramblings that a lot of this type of work looks like. So I'm just going to point out some of the things I liked early on, because it's indicative of the type of thoughts that go throughout the book, and then just some other things I pointed out. Like this early one here, I think is really funny. It gives this perspective of how Michael Deforge is trying to I don't know, approach human behavior and also human society from the outside lens. So these birds are just going on about how this other bird is so hot because he has this big wingspan. It's let's see if I can. It's this seagull that has a big wingspan, and they think that's really hot. So Jenny's talking to her friend Ramil about James. James is so hot. James is so hot. I let him snap off my wings. I let him wear my organs as earmuffs. James is so hot I'd let him pluck all my feathers and roast me on a spit. And they kind of go on like that. And then Ramil says, James is so hot I'd like to have sex with him. And Jenny says, no, Ramil, you're doing it wrong. You're supposed to say he's hot and then follow it up with something awful you'd let him do to you. And Ramil says, James is so hot that I'd move in with him so we could start a life together. As the years go on, he'd gradually grow distant as he found himself drifting away from me. It wouldn't be for any specific reason. He'd never say a word to me about it. After all, he'd still love me. But he'd never respect me, which is why he'd never do me the courtesy of leaving me. Instead, we'd simply suffer in silence. We'd die that way too, loving each other, unable to bear each other in utter agony. Which is like so much more depressing than like I'd let him nest in my rib cage. And then Jenny just goes on, James is so hot, I'd scramble and eat an egg if he asked me to. So that's the kind of writing that Michael Deforge always has. You know, it's this very almost like an outsider looking in on the way humans work, and almost looking at it too analytically to the point where you're like, you know, it becomes strange. And I guess as an artist, I think probably most of us that are artists identify with that kind of outsider feeling. You know, things don't make sense, society doesn't make sense. Here's another one where it's more looking at like the kind of ridiculousness of human society. Obviously, a lot of this book, since the birds have a socialist society, it's a critique of like consumerist society that we currently live in, and ownership and things like that. So this one says, so people had to pay money for foods and their homes? Yes. And this is Jenny's mom, who's a historian of Earth. And I don't know who this character is. One of her friends, I don't see a name, but Chloe is Jenny's mother. Who did they give the money to? Carpenters? Architects? No. I don't get it. Why would some other guy own my home? Oh, here's her name. Tara, I'm trying to read. Why didn't these people just leave Maine to live somewhere else? I keep saying it wasn't just Maine. Talking to you always fucks up my whole day. I think you could learn to like history. It's like a puzzle, you know? What happens when you solve it? Beheadings! What? No, you write an essay about it. But I like that, you know, because, yeah, like when people understand the kind of structural implications of history, it often does lead to revolt and beheadings. So I like that. Again, it's that like outsider perspective on, you know, why society is the way it is and why wouldn't it be something else. I always gotten in trouble. I always said I'm an accidental rebel because I just never understand why things work the way they work, and I try and operate the way I think things should work, and that's never what it works out to be. So I feel sympathy with the book. Something that I'm really impressed with Deforge, beyond his just amazing color choices and compositions and uniqueness of his vision and style of abstraction and all of that, is within all of that, within his weird abstractions, he'll be consistent with them. So like in this one, he's just coming up with different instruments that the birds are playing: electric keyboard, cello, clarinet, trumpet, drums, and then harmonica. So just the invention of each one of these and the look of it all and the color choices and stuff is amazing. But then once he's landed on one of these weird looks, he'll be consistent with it. So this harmonica shows up throughout, or like the stylization of each bird, they'll be doing different things, but it kind of always has that same feel to it. And his work is so diverse throughout his different books. That's always really impressive, that once he lands on a style for a story, he can stick with it while he's still going and doing these other things. And his designs stay consistent, you know, these different instruments. I just, it's so impressive. And it's things that I guess when I was looking at it daily and I was forgetting. I was kind of forgetting which characters were which and which designs were which. So those things really pile up over time. And you see, he'll kind of just like stick on a storyline and go with it for a while. And when he runs out of an idea, he'll do like an abstract one like this, you know, like a silent one where it's really just doing scenery. Really, even though things are representational, you can tell it's like a penguin, and here's this fungal network, and here's a fire around some fungus with some birds in it, or maybe some grass blowing. They're mostly abstract. They're the abstract formal composition of it all is what's there and holding it together. Those were always my favorites when they were on Instagram, because you could really consume it one at a time. But he uses those and some other ones like this where it's like a bird news network that always ends at it's 9:45. He uses that almost like a way to seed a new story. Some of the things will be grabbed onto and picked up on, and some of them will be left later. So that's really inspiring to me, because it's like I would love to do something like that. I always feel like I have a plan with what I'm doing. And he really walks a tightrope and has learned how to create openings in a story for it to go somewhere else. And really with this one, it's interesting, especially reading it through, you start to get a feeling of when he's really latched onto something and when he's stumbling about a bit. And you get to see some of his strategies. Like it feels like if he's stumbling about for a storyline, he'll just look up some facts about birds and do a couple like jokey pieces about birds and then let that lead to something else. And so it has that flow of life getting more interesting and life kind of just happening and life getting more interesting and happening, and that over time builds up to something really interesting. Here's another funny one. What are you listening to, Ivy? So Ivy is one of the members of Jenny's band, and she develops an interest in economics. So an economics lecture. And this bird's like, what? I don't know why you and Dad give me such a hard time about wanting to study economics. Just don't let your father catch you. I keep telling you, economics is a real science. Dear, the study of economics is one of the darkest, most shameful vestiges lunar society has retained from ancient Earthkind. Wanting to become an expert in economics is akin to wanting to become a connoisseur of serial killing. You're being weird. Look, I went through a goth phase too. Mom! And economics keeps coming back throughout the story as like almost occultism and blood sacrifice and stuff like that. So that's another funny one. And it's those kind of things that seem one-off at first that create the seeds for larger stories. Here's a really, really fun one where it's different types of notation: lunar notation, cold moon variation, ripple writing, spore script, ring writing, bark script. Something else Deforge seems to be really good at is taking real things and smashing them together to make absurd things, like bark script, but they're like also plausible things, coming up with like, look, we could create a language by movements of bark, or how rings happen, or how ripples, like those are things that could be interpreted as signals in a way or something like that. So that's something else I like about him. He's always opening my mind up to new possibilities about ways of thinking about reality. About halfway through the book, you get what seems like, okay, we've learned about this bird society. He's kind of figured his way through how the bird society works after 200 of these, and now a human's going to land. This human astronaut is coming, and this bird society is going to have to deal with that. And I remember when I was reading these day to day on Instagram, I thought, okay, now the story's really kicking off. This isn't daily, and I got excited about that. And it goes for a while, but then it's almost like he just gets bored with it, or he didn't know exactly where he wanted to take it. And they kind of advertise in the book as like this is a story about this utopian bird society that has to deal with the human, but it kind of just goes nowhere. I don't think that's much of a spoiler to say that. It's that doesn't make the book like less worth picking up. I think it makes it more interesting. So I find that, it's like, here's this peak of like this story's going to kick off, and then, it goes somewhere, but then it kind of just goes back to, like the birds doing the bird stuff, and it almost like the story peters out a little bit and just goes back to this experimental writing. So I don't want to give away too much more about where it goes, because I think you should pick up the book, but it kind of just goes back to these like daily strip kind of things. One of them that I found really funny, because of having dealt with swans before, is this one about swans, and they're talking about swans having a bad temper, and this swan's always kind of like electric. I one summer in between my 2 years of grad school rented a little in-law house that like the backyard literally went down into like a little lake, inlet to a much larger lake, and there was a family of swans that would come up to our backyard. Yeah, and they're super aggressive and they're huge and scary too. And so that was funny because they're so beautiful, but they really are like these asshole animals. We'd feed them bread, but you got to keep your hand close so you don't get bit. And the dad one was especially huge and aggressive. The mom and the babies were all right. So that was funny. It felt accurate. Like that feels like their energy of the swans. Here's another thing that I think just shows Michael Deforge's absolute genius. Like his decision making genius, or his ability to conceptualize things exactly right. He has Jenny doing all of these drawings because she wants to be a fashion designer, and she's doing drawings of humans wearing human clothes. And I think it's just absolute moment of genius that they're all seen from this bird's eye view. This is like the cartoon. He's such a good cartoonist, and he understands like the human cartoon brain enough that like if a human cartoon brain's gonna draw a hand, they would do it this way, and if we draw it like this way, it doesn't register as a hand. And he's realizing that birds see everything above, so their cartoon brain image would see everything this way, and this way would be unrecognizable to them probably. And so I just find that like this is just absolute pure genius, observational accuracy, under really understanding both how humans form images and then applying that in a funny way to like how birds would conceptualize things, and then does that again here where this looks like drawings that Jenny has made, self-portraits of me in a tree, me in the shade of another tree, me in my nest, me hiding, and they all have that same top-down view, me with mushrooms. And yeah, I can't go on enough about how genius that is. And then in the end, I won't say what it is, but the end of the book, as I was reading it, I'm like, okay, we only have a few pages left to go, and it feels like there's another big story arc coming, and it just ends without that story arc resolving. So I immediately went scrambling to Instagram to see, is he still doing Birds of Maine stories? And this is just like, well, we've got 460 pages of it, we better publish it, and then we can release a volume 2 after we get another 460 pages, because this is obviously a big book. But no, he just ends it, and it said this is the final one and we're going to publish it, and he's done with this experiment. So I think that's brave too, and like I said, I think that has this cycles of like interesting things happen in life, and then things just go back to normal for a while, and then something interesting, but like we don't need to keep going because it could go forever. But you know, as a fan of this work and a fan of his stuff in general, you kind of wish, well, I wish he would just keep doing one of these a day for the rest of his career while he's doing other stuff. He's obviously prolific and fast and probably could do it. But I respect that. Like, you know, okay, I've said what I need to say. I could keep going with the story, but I don't need to. So, beautiful book. I mean, I'm sure by flipping through, like, I don't need to go on about the color and the design of it. It's just obvious what a master this guy is. But really the thing that hits me with his work is that the stories are always gripping and compelling and emotionally resonant. I still think the Ant Colony book is my favorite one of his, probably just because it's the first one that I was exposed to. The Big People, I think is what it's called. I don't know. That one and this one are like my top 3 Michael Deforge books. So it's definitely up there with the best of his work, in my opinion. It's everything I love about him on full display. So I would definitely recommend picking this up. If you can't afford it, it's free on Instagram under the handle Birds of Maine, which is pretty awesome that he's leaving that up there. So you can check it out whether you can buy it or not, but if you can support it, definitely go buy it. If you like what we do here on this channel and you want to support us, we do have a Patreon, but the best way that you can support us is to just buy the books that Sean has coming out or that have already come out from Living the Line. So we'll take a look at a couple of those products now. There's also Yokoyama Yuichi's Plaza, which is a totally intense manga by an artist who has somehow figured out how to distill manga down to its purest essence. This book was successfully funded on Kickstarter, but if you missed the Kickstarter, you can order it through any comic store, any bookstore, Amazon, any place that you would normally get your graphic novels from. The Abolition of Man is a 5-issue mini-series done by myself and Sean in collaboration with the Midjourney AI. What you're seeing here is the cover to issue 1 and the first couple pages of issue 1. This first issue, we fed it an essay by C.S. Lewis, and this is just the imagery that the computer spat back at us. Issues 2 and 3 are a narrative, starting with the story that I wrote when I was 21, and then Sean's going to write issue 3, picking up where I left off. In this one, I'm kind of trying to force the AI to give me the images I want, and then doing some tweaking in Photoshop to get these kind of colored looks on it. For issue 4, we're turning the task of writing over to the AI as well. So the AI has written the script, and then we've just put that into the Midjourney AI, and it's turned out art. The script and the art is some of the absolutely most horrific stuff I've ever seen. We're a bit scared to even publish this issue. And I don't have any art to show for it yet, but Sean and I have decided to do a 5th issue of Abolition as well, because we have someone who we're really, really excited to have on board, providing an essay for that 5th issue that we'll illustrate, and we'll announce more about that soon. Eric Creek's The Exile, which has been described by the artist as his Viking Western. It's a really intense story of revenge, rendered with this beautiful pen and ink style, and then these couple of spot colors that were also done in layers on ink and then converted into color. So that's just a really, really beautiful book, and a really intense story. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.